Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. I remember one of our church retreats to Luther Ridge. We had decided to have an early Christian worship service, and what that means is that since the early Christians didn't have hymnals, the only songs you could sing were what the group remembered. So we sang songs that we remembered that day. Likewise, since things hadn't been written down yet, the only scriptures they had were stories that they remembered. I remember being up front asking for stories of Jesus or the early church that anyone remembered, and one precocious child eagerly said, "Let's talk about Paul at Malta." Well, truthfully, that's not a story that many in the room even knew. This week we are looking at stories in the Bible that happened when it was cold, and the story of Paul at Malta seems to be one of them. The story is found in Acts 28, but it is really part of a much larger story. A few chapters earlier, Paul was in Jerusalem to bring the church there some money he had collected to help support the church. Since Paul was always eager to talk about Jesus, he was in the temple and began to do just that, and the priests had him arrested and then put him on trial for disturbing the peace. This was a serious charge to the Romans, who were trying to control a large area of land and who therefore valued things being peaceful. So there Paul was in a Roman courtroom, and toward the end of the trial it looked very much like the judge was going to find Paul not guilty and set him free. To prevent being set free, Paul appealed to Caesar. Now, on the surface, that doesn't seem to make sense. If he were about to be set free, why would he appeal to Caesar and prolong his trial? You see, every Roman citizen had that right to have his or her case heard by Caesar, and most biblical scholars believe that Paul wanted the opportunity to tell the Caesar about Jesus. If he could convert the Caesar, then the whole empire might be won for Christ. So they put Paul on a ship and sent him toward Rome. However, on the way, the ship encountered a horrible storm. They fought it for 2 weeks, eating nothing, and finally they let Paul lead them in prayer, and he assured them they would all be safe. Not long after, the ship foundered on some rocks, and all 270 or so people on board had to swim, and they came to an island, and when they encountered some natives, they found out they were on Malta. The Bible tells how the people of Malta were welcoming to these folks, even knowing that many of them were prisoners. They built a fire so they could warm themselves, implying that it was cold. Suddenly, roused by the fire, a poisonous snake came out of the wood and bit Paul on the arm. The natives saw this as a sign that Paul must be a very bad person and that the gods had meant for him to perish in the storm, and since he didn't, they were going to kill him with the snake. However, when the snake bite had no effect on Paul, they changed their minds and decided that he must be a great holy man. By the way, all the people on the boat did make it to safety, just as Paul had promised. Probably one of the most important points to take from this story is that we are called to place our trust in God. This was a fierce storm, but Paul maintained his faith and invited others to share in that trust. In the same way, his whole journey to preach to Caesar was a powerful journey of trust. Paul didn't know what was going to happen to him, but he knew that he went with God. Perhaps in the storms and adventures of our lives, we can have that same trust and faith. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.